Welcome to our channel Elimika Mtandaoni. This is the 13th episode on our series of videos on research process, and today we'll be talking about qualitative data collection. So let us start with the introduction. As we are talking about qualitative data collection, some people think of qualitative data collection as just observing people or interviewing people, but it is more than just deciding whether you want to observe or you want to interview people. There are a number of steps that you should follow for you to say that you are doing qualitative data collection. These steps normally follow one another, but they should not be seen as linear approaches, although they can follow one another. So these steps are as follows. The first step, you have to identify participants and sites to be studied, and also to engage them in the sampling strategy that will best help you understand your central phenomena and the research questions you are asking. So as the first step that you say, we identify participants and sites to be studied. Here you will also decide on the sampling strategy that you will use. And the sampling strategy that you will select will be the one that will help you understand your central phenomena, or will help you to answer the research questions that you are asking. The second step is you have to gain access to these individual sites through obtaining permissions. So you have to gain access to the individuals, you have to gain access to the sites. So if you have identified that, let's say you will study let's say system developers of a certain organization, then you need to gain access to those developers and you have to gain access to those organizations. So you have to ask for permissions. Then the third step, you have to consider types of information that will best answer your research questions. Whether you are doing interviews, or you are doing observations, or you are doing document analysis, etc., then you have to specifically point out what types of information that will be or will help you to answer the research questions. At the same time, you need to design protocols or instruments for collecting and recording such information that you will gather so that you can answer the research questions. And finally, you need to administer the data collection, but with special attention to potential ethical issues that may rise. So those are the steps that you should follow while you are doing qualitative data collection. Then we have to point out some basic differences between quantitative data collection and qualitative data collection. These differences are helpful for us to know at this point. If you base on the general characteristics of qualitative research, then qualitative data collection consists of the following. You collect data using forms with the general imaging questions so that you can permit the participants to generate responses, and from there you gather word or text or images data, and you collect such information from a small number of individuals or sites. So what's the difference between the quantitative and the qualitative data collection? Starting with the first difference, we say in quantitative research, what we do, we systematically identify our participants and sites through what we call random sampling. If you are doing a quantitative research, then there is a kind of equal chance of obtaining participants, or equal chance of selecting participants or sites. And in that case, you use random sampling. But in qualitative, we identify our participants and we identify our sites on purposeful sampling, based on the places, based on people that can best help us understand our central phenomena. If you are doing a research if you want to do how doctors perform their jobs, then the best people should be the doctors themselves. So purposeful, you select participants so that they can help you to understand the central phenomenon. And in both quantitative and qualitative research, we do need permissions when we want to begin our study. But in qualitative research, we need greater access to these sites, because you will typically go to the sites and you will interview people, you will observe them. So this process requires a greater level of participation from the site other than the quantitative research process does. So you need greater access to these participants. You need greater access to the sites, because you do a typical observation, you do a typical interview with the people that you are studying. In both approaches, the quantitative and qualitative approach, we collect data such as interviews, we collect data such as observations and documents. But in qualitative research, this approach relies much on general interviews and relies much on observations, so that we don't restrict the views of participants. So we will not use someone else's instrument as in quantitative research and gather close-ended information, but we will instead collect data with a few open-ended questions that we have designed ourselves, so that we can get much from the participants. Again, in both approaches, we need to record the information supplied by the participants. But rather than using predefined instrument from someone else's, like what we did in quantitative data collection, there were a time that we are allowed in quantitative data collection to locate an instrument from someone else, and we modify such instruments to suit our need. So in qualitative data collections, we don't do that. In qualitative research, we will record information on self-designed protocols that will help us to organize information reported by these participants to each question that we have identified. Then finally, we will administer our procedures of qualitative data collection with the sensitivity to the challenges and the ethical issues of gathering information face to face. And often we do that in people's homes, we do that in workplaces. So there is much sensitivity as we are dealing with the qualitative data collection other than quantitative data collection, simply because studying people in their own environment creates a lot of challenges for qualitative researchers, and that may not be present in quantitative research. So when investigators mail out an anonymous questionnaire or bring individuals into experimental laboratory for quantitative research, they don't need much of sensitivity. But with the qualitative research, we need a lot of to consider the challenges and to consider some ethical issues that may arise. So what are the different sampling approaches that we can use to select participants and sites? We say in quantitative research or in quantitative inquiry, the intent or the aim is not to generalize. We are speaking about qualitative inquiry. If you are talking about qualitative research, its aim is not about generalizing to a population. But what we do, we need to develop an in-depth exploration of central phenomena. Unlike quantitative, where we select a sample and from that sample we analyze the sample to generalize to the general population, but in qualitative that is not the case. Thus, to best understand this phenomena, the qualitative researcher, what they do purposely or intentionally select individuals and sites. So the selection of individuals and selection of sites is done purposively. In quantitative research, the focus is on random sampling, but in qualitative research, there is what we call purposive sampling. Then, let's now talk about the purposive sampling. Let's talk about purposive sampling. Uh, the researcher term that is used for qualitative research is purposive sampling. In purposive sampling, researchers intentionally select individuals and sites to learn or understand the central phenomena. So they use purposive sampling researchers to intentionally select individuals and sites so that they can learn or they can understand the central phenomena. The standard used in choosing participants and sites is whether they are information rich. What does this mean? We select participants taking into consideration that they have information that it can help to understand the central phenomena. So purposive sampling implies to both. It implies to individuals and it implies to sites. If you conduct your own study and use purposive sampling, you need to identify your sampling strategies, and in that case, you will be able to defend its use. You must be able to defend its use. So there are different purposive sampling strategies. Purposive sampling strategies that as we have seen there in the slides, we have what we call a maximum variation sampling, we have critical sampling, we have opportunistic sampling, we have snowballing sampling, and we have theory or concept sampling. We will talk about one among those strategies that is called the snowballing. This snowballing applies in certain research situations that you may not know the best people to study. It may be because of unfamiliarity of the topic or the complexity of some events. So as you select snowballing, this snowballing, it applies to a situation where you do not know who to consult for you to get such information. As in quantitative research, qualitative snowballing sampling is a form of purposive sampling that it typically proceeds after a study begins, and this occurs when the researcher asks participants to recommend other individuals to be sampled. So you find a first participant after you have gathered information, or you asked him or her some information, then you ask him to recommend another person that you can use or that from which information you can use to answer the research question. So researcher may do the following. Researcher may pose this request by asking a question during interview, or they can ask through a conversation with the individual in a formal conversation or informal conversation at the research site, Now let's talk about the sample size or the number of research sites that we can use. Speaking of sample size or number of research sites, this means the number of people and the number of sites that can be sampled to be used in the research. So the sampled sites, the sampled people, they vary from one qualitative study to the next. But there are some guidelines that we should follow as we are selecting the sample size. So it is typical in qualitative research to study a few individual or a few cases. Why? We study few individuals or few cases in qualitative study because the overall ability of a researcher to provide an in-depth picture diminishes with the addition of each new individual. So if you add a new individual, then that capability, that ability of a researcher to provide an in-depth picture with the an in-depth picture of what he wants or she wants to capture from the participants diminishes. In some cases, you might study a single individual or you study a single site so that you can learn an in-depth, you can get an in-depth understanding about the central phenomena. In other cases, the number may be ranging from the smaller the two or to more than two cases. What types of permissions will be required to gain access to participants and sites? What types of permissions? Speaking of what types of permissions, it depends on levels. You can ask permission from the level of individuals, you can ask permission from the level of sites, and you can ask permissions from the level of institutions. And then let's discuss about the types of data to be collected. Another aspect of qualitative data collection is to identify the types of data that will address the research questions. Thus, it is important to become familiar with the research questions. You have to become familiar with the topics and to review them before you decide on the types of qualitative data that you will collect. In qualitative research, what you do, you pose a general, broad question to the participants and you allow them to share their views. So you pose a question, then you allow them to share their views. In addition, you collect multiple types of information and you may add new forms of data during the study to answer your questions. Further, what you can do, you can engage in an extensive data collection. You spend a great deal of time at the site where people work, you play or you engage in the phenomena you wish to study. When you are at the site, you gather detailed information to establish the complexity of the central phenomenon. So what you do, you can see a varied nature of qualitative forms of data when they are placed into different categories, and we have a number of categories where we can place such information. So we have forms of qualitative data. We have different forms of qualitative data. We have what we call observations. We have interviews and questionnaires. We have documents, and we have audio materials. So speaking of observations, observation actually is the process of gathering open-ended first-hand information by observing people and the places at a research site. As we have said, observation is a process of gathering open-ended first-hand information by observing people and places at a research site. As a form of data collection, observation has both advantages and disadvantages. So, speaking of advantages, they include with the observation, you can have an opportunity to record information as they occur. You record information as they occur in the site. So you get to know the actual behavior, and you study individuals who have difficulty verbalizing their ideas. Some people cannot speak their ideas, but you can get whatever they have through observation. So what types of data that observation can record? You can have field notes and some drawings. Those are the types of data that can be recorded through observation. Another form of data collection, another form of qualitative data collection is interview. With the interview, a qualitative interview occurs when a researcher asks one or more participants general open-ended questions and then record their answers. The researcher then transcribes these types of data into computer files or can analyze them. So speaking of interviews, the types of data obtained through interview include transcriptions of open-ended. We have interviews or open-ended questions or questionnaires. In qualitative research, what you do is you ask open-ended questions so that the participants can best voice their experiences, and such experiences are unconstrained. They are unconstrained. They are not depending on the researcher or past research findings, but their own voice. An open-ended question allows the participant to create the options for responding. So we have different types of interviews, and we have different types of open-ended questions. For example, we have one that is called one-to-one interview. In one-to-one interview, in fact, this is the most time-consuming and costly approach, but it gives access for the researcher to ask an individual or the participant in a face-to-face. Another type of interview, we have what we call focus group interviews. In focus group, you use to collect shared understanding from several individuals, as well as you get their views from a specific people. So a focus group interview actually is the process of collecting data through interview with groups of people, and it can take up to 4 or 6 people. Now we have another type of interview. We call it telephone interview. You conduct a telephone interview where you gather data using telephone, and you ask a small number of general questions. Again, we have another what we call email interviews. We can also do email interview where you collect open-ended data through interviews with individuals using computers and internet. Now let's move to open-ended questions on questionnaire. On questionnaires, you may ask some questions that are close-ended and some that are open-ended. But to analyze open-ended responses or open-ended questionnaires in qualitative research, what you do is you look for overlapping themes in the open-ended data, and there you count the number of themes or the number of times that the participant mentioned certain themes. Now, again, let's move to documents. Documents consist of public and private records that qualitative researcher obtain about the site or about the participants in the study. And these include, let's say, newspapers. They include minutes of meetings. They include official memos, records in the public domain, and different archives of materials in the library, etc. Another qualitative data collection is audio-visual material, where you collect types of data like pictures, photographs, videotapes, objects, and sounds. Now, let's move with our qualitative data collection. There are some procedures to be followed while you record data in qualitative data collection. An essential process in qualitative research is to record data. This process involves recording information through research protocols. You administer data collection so that you can anticipate potential problems in data collection, and you bring what we call sensitivity to ethical issues that may affect the quality of data. So the first thing you'll do data recording protocols. Data recording protocols, these are forms. There are different forms that are designed, and they are used by qualitative researchers to record information during observations and interview. For example, You can have interview protocols. Interview protocols is a kind of form. It's a kind of form whereby the researcher use, and these forms they contain instructions for the process of interviewing. It contains the questions to be asked, and it contains a space where you can take notes while you are interviewing some interviewee. And we have observational protocol. This also is a form that is designed by the researcher before data collection, and it is used for taking field notes during observation. And in this form, researcher records data in a chronology of events, a detailed portrait of an individual's, or a researcher can draw picture, a researcher can draw maps of setting or verbatim quotes of the individuals, etc. So, and the last thing that we will look on the field issues and the ethical considerations in the data collections. Once data collection procedures are in place, then qualitative inquirer what does collects data, and this data is collected. Prior attention is given to the field issues that may occur in the process. So the data also need to be collected ethically, with the sensitivity to individuals, to populations that are being studied, and the research sites. So we have to be very much ethical as we are collecting qualitative data, and we need to consider some ethical issues. So that is how we do a qualitative data collections. So this is the end of qualitative data collection. In the next episode, we will talk about